Hello everyone, in today's Explainer we are going to look at one of the most important events in world history, the French Revolution. Now, we often think of revolutions as starting with a big fight, but that's not always the case. We're going to explore how a whole series of events, like a chain reaction, set the stage for a revolution that would change France and really the entire world. Let's begin.
So, how are we going to understand this story? We'll follow 6 key steps. We will start with France's big money problem, its financial crisis. Then we'll see how a very unfair political system made things worse. After that, we'll witness a powerful promise made on a tennis court, the famous storming of a prison called the Bastille, and see how fear and rebellion spread to the countryside. All of this, you will see, leads to the birth of a new France.
You see, revolutions don't just happen overnight. They often start with very deep problems, like a country that's about to go bankrupt. For France, an empty treasury was like the first domino to fall, triggering a chain of events that would lead straight to revolution.
So let's picture the scene. It's 1774, and a young man, only 20 years old, Louis XVI, becomes the King of France. He probably had big dreams for his rule, but he was met with a very harsh reality. He inherited a kingdom that was hiding a huge secret. Its royal bank accounts were completely empty.
To understand why, we need to look at French society, which was part of something called the Old Regime. It was divided into 3 groups, or estates. The first estate was the clergy, the people of the church. The second estate was the nobility. Now, these 2 groups had all the privileges and paid almost no taxes. But the third estate, which was basically everyone else from businessmen to poor peasants, had to pay for everything. They carried the entire financial weight of the country on their shoulders. A very, very unfair system, as you can see.
So, how did France get into such a big financial mess? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was a combination of problems that had been building up for a long time. There were long and expensive wars. The king and queen lived a very lavish life at the Palace of Versailles, which cost a fortune to maintain. And France had spent a huge amount of money, over 1 billion livres, which was their currency, helping the 13 American colonies win their independence from Britain. All of this meant the government was borrowing money and was just drowning in debt and interest payments.
The king was desperate. He needed money, and the only way to get it was to raise taxes. But he couldn't just decide to do that on his own. And this is where the money problem started to turn into a big political problem. The king had to face the unfairness that was built right into the French system. You see, according to the rules of the old regime, a French king could not just create new taxes whenever he wanted. He had to call a meeting of something called the Estates General. This was a big assembly with representatives from all 3 estates, and he needed their approval. So this meeting was set, and it really became the stage for a huge political fight.
And here is where the unfairness of the system became so obvious. The way they voted was completely rigged. Each of the 3 estates got only 1 vote. So the first and second estates, the clergy and the nobility, could always team up and vote 2-1 against the third estate. The third estate, which represented almost everybody in France, demanded a change. They said, "This is not fair. We want 1 vote for each member, for each representative." This was a truly democratic idea.
To understand just how unfair this was, let's think about a simple classroom example. Imagine you're in a class of 30 students. The teacher says 2 students will get 1 vote each, but the rest of you, all 28 students, have to share 1 single vote between all of you. How would you feel? Would that seem fair? Of course not. This is exactly the kind of frustration that the people of the third estate were feeling.
The king made a huge mistake. He refused to change the voting rules, and this pushed the third estate to do something incredibly bold. They started a revolution, not with weapons, but with words and a powerful, sacred promise.
So on the 5th of May, 1789, when the king rejected their demand, the third estate did something amazing. They walked out of the Estates General meeting. In this powerful act of protest, they declared that they were now the National Assembly, the true representatives of the French nation. This was a direct challenge to the king's power. A few weeks later, on June 20th, they arrived for their meeting to find the hall was locked. But that didn't stop them. They found a new place to meet, an indoor tennis court nearby. And as you can see in this famous painting, they all gathered together full of determination to make a historic promise to each other.
This promise is known as the Tennis Court Oath. It was a truly revolutionary moment. They swore an oath that they would not leave until they had written a constitution for France. And what would this constitution do? It would limit the power of the king. The idea was that the people, not just the monarch, should have the power.
Now, while all of this political drama was happening with the National Assembly, things were getting very tense on the streets of Paris. The revolution was about to leave the meeting rooms and explode into violence.
The people in Paris were hungry. A very bad winter had ruined the harvest, so the price of bread, the main food for most people, went up and up. People were desperate. On top of this hunger, the king ordered his troops to move into the city. This made everyone very scared and angry. Rumors started flying around that the king was going to attack his own citizens. Fear and anger spread like wildfire.
And then, on the morning of July 14th, the situation just exploded. A crowd of about 7,000 men and women got together and formed a kind of people's army. First, they broke into government buildings, looking for weapons. Then, they all marched towards the Bastille. This was an old fortress and prison, and they believed it was full of ammunition. A fight broke out, the commander of the Bastille was killed, and the crowd stormed the fortress.
This image here really captures the anger and the chaos of that day. The attack on the Bastille wasn't just about getting ammunition. It was a fight against a building that stood as a symbol of the king's cruel and absolute power. For the people of France, the Bastille represented everything they hated about the old regime. This is a very important point to understand. The storming of the Bastille was not about freeing lots of prisoners. In fact, there were only 7 people inside at the time. The Bastille was hated because it represented the despotic or tyrannical power of the king. So when it fell, it was a massive symbolic victory. It proved that ordinary people could stand up to the king's power and win.
The news of what happened in Paris spread very fast, and it sparked a wave of panic and rebellion that swept across the French countryside. The revolution was no longer just in Paris, it was everywhere. As you can see from this map, a strange kind of panic, which historians call the Great Fear, spread from village to village. There were wild rumors that the nobles had hired gangs of criminals to go around and burn the crops. These rumors were terrifying, and they plunged the entire countryside into chaos.
Caught in this panic, the peasants decided to fight back. They attacked the castles of their lords. They took the grain that had been hoarded away. And most importantly, they burned the old documents that listed all the feudal dues and taxes they were forced to pay. This was a direct attack on the feudal system that had oppressed them for centuries.
So, with Paris in revolt and the countryside in flames, the king and the old system were cornered. They really had no other choice but to give in to what the people were demanding. A new France was about to be born.
Let's just quickly recap the incredible events of 1789. It started in May with the political fight at the Estates General. Then came the defiant tennis court oath in June. In July, we had the storming of the Bastille, and finally, on August 4th, faced with all this pressure, the National Assembly officially abolished the entire feudal system. In just a few months, the old France was gone forever.
We have seen how a money problem became a political crisis, and how that crisis was ignited by a powerful symbolic act. This leaves us with an interesting question to think about. Can a symbol, like a destroyed prison, be just as powerful in changing a country as a new law written in a constitution? Something for you to consider. Thank you.